The mountains of the Pacific Northwest did not just host Shadowfen. They actively concealed it, drowning it in a sea of ancient hemlock and perpetual rain. The manor was a scar of black basalt and weeping gargoyles, a Gothic defiance against the relentless, indifferent green of the Olympic Peninsula. It existed in a state of brooding twilight, feeding on a microclimate of fog and shadow that clung to its towers like a shroud. This was not a home. It was a cage, a fortress, a monument. This was the seat of Lord Cassian, and it was a bastion built not against armies, but against the relentless, trivial passage of time. Inside, the air was cold, thin, and heavy. It carried the scent of ancient stone, the dry vanilla smell of decaying books, beeswax from a million forgotten candles, and something else, metallic and sharp, that always lingered beneath. The smell of old power, like ozone before a strike of lightning. Lord Cassian stood in the obsidian solarium. The room was his sanctum, a vast hemisphere walled with dark-tinted, magically treated glass that muted the already weak daylight into a deep, aquatic gloom. Even on the brightest summer day, this room felt like the bottom of a deep lake. He was tall, his stillness absolute, the stillness of a predator that knows it has no predators of its own. He was dressed in the severe, perfect black of a man who needed no color to assert his presence, his clothes tailored with a precision that bordered on the ascetic. His face was a masterpiece of cold, classical geometry, beautiful in the way a perfectly cut diamond or a snowflake is beautiful, intricate, flawless, and utterly devoid of warmth. His eyes, fixed on the landscape beyond the glass, were the color of a winter sky just before the first snow. He was the king, the master, the final arbiter of a shadow world that coexisted uneasily with the blindingly bright ephemeral world of mortals. And he was, for the first time in perhaps a century, deeply, profoundly annoyed. He was hosting the tri-century conclave. This meant Shadowfen was infested, not with pests, but with something far more dangerous, his peers. The manor, usually his silent, well-ordered machine, was teeming with the volatile egos of the ancient. Lord Valerius, from the eastern seaboard, was in the library, his silk vests and political poisons offending the air. The twin sisters from the Crescent City, ancient and feral, were currently sleeping in the north wing, their dreams no doubt filled with velvet and simmering malice. Over a dozen of the oldest, most powerful vampire lords in the New World were gathered under his roof. Their presence was a tangled web of competing ambitions, thousand-year-old feuds, and barely restrained hungers that made the very stones of the manor thrum with tension. The entire estate was on edge. The human staff, a distasteful necessity, Cassian tolerated for the sake of appearances and the smooth running of the estate, had been trained to the point of invisibility. They were phantoms in gray uniforms, existing only in whispers, their footsteps silenced by thick Axminster carpets, their heads perpetually bowed, their eyes always on the floor. They were terrified, and rightly so. The air thrummed with the barely restrained power of the guests, a low-frequency vibration of predation that made the human heart flutter in instinctive, ancestral terror. Just an hour ago, Cassian had been walking toward the gallery when he'd overheard the distinct, oily sound of Valerius's laughter from the atrium. It was followed by a tiny, choked squeak, a housemaid, and the sound of a dropped silver tray. When Cassian had glided into view, Valerius was merely examining a tapestry, licking a drop of red from his thumb. Not blood, Cassian noted with grim satisfaction, but wine from a spilled goblet. The girl was gone, having fled. But the disorder of it, the childish, arrogant display, had set Cassian's teeth on edge. His entire eons-long existence was predicated on one simple, unassailable thing: order. The conclave was chaos, barely contained. He managed it, as he managed everything, through sheer, unadulterated force of will and a reputation forged over a millennium of brutal, quiet control. He was reviewing the security protocols for the conclave's final ball, a tedious affair, when the weather, always temperamental in this valley, finally broke. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a deluge. A sudden, violent assault of ice-laced water that turned the manicured gardens below into a churning watercolor of green and gray. The wind didn't just howl, it shrieked, a living thing, slamming the frozen rain against the impervious obsidian glass with a sound like handfuls of thrown gravel. Cassian watched the storm, impassive. He appreciated its power, its glorious lack of sentiment. It was pure, logical, and absolute. And then his hawk-like gaze, a gaze that could spot a panicked mouse in a field from 1,000 feet, caught it. A flaw, a disruption. A tiny, insignificant flicker of wrongness in the perfect, violent tableau. Down in the west courtyard, far from the main entrance, huddled against the rough black stone of the old carriage house, was a figure. A splash of faded, watery blue against the streaming gray. It was one of the servants, a woman. A girl, really, by her slight frame. She was sitting on a low, wet stone bench, utterly, pitifully exposed to the elements. Her thin uniform, the same gray-blue as all the others, was plastered to her small frame, offering no protection. Her dark hair was a sopping, tangled mat, stuck to her face and neck in rivulets. She was shivering, a violent, uncontrollable full-body tremor that he could see clearly even from his high perch. But that was not the part that held his gaze, that made his mind stop its political calculations. She was trying to eat. In one trembling hand, a hand so blue it looked bruised, she held a small, cheap plastic container. In the other, a fork. She would raise the fork, try to guide a bite of something toward her mouth, only for the wind to whip it away, or the rain to douse it. Her food, he could see, was a pale, congealed mass of what looked like rice. It was getting soaked, turning into a gray soup. Her knuckles were raw, chapped red against the blue of her skin. Cassian watched, his brow slowly, almost imperceptibly, furrowing. This was illogical. Utterly, maddeningly illogical. The staff had quarters in the sublevels, quarters that were warmer and better appointed than most mortal apartments. The kitchens were vast, lit by a massive hearth that never went out. The staff dining hall was comfortable, insulated, and, most importantly, safe. He had spent a fortune and a great deal of his not inconsiderable power to ward the human sections of Shadowfen. The kitchens, the laundry, the sleeping halls, they were sealed. My guests, for all their power, could not enter. They were bound by the ancient laws of hospitality and by Cassian's own stronger magic. The wards would repel them with a force that felt like stepping into solid rock. So, why would any creature, even a short-lived, irrational human, choose to sit in a freezing deluge, courting hypothermia, to consume a meal that was rapidly becoming inedible? It was disorderly. It was inefficient. It was an anomaly. And Lord Cassian hated anomalies. He didn't feel pity. Pity was a useless, watery, human emotion he had discarded centuries ago, along with guilt, hope, and the need for sunlight. What he felt was irritation. A deep, cold, intellectual disturbance. The same feeling he got when a line item in a financial ledger didn't add up, or when a guest, like Valerius, used a triple negative in a sentence. It was just wrong. He turned from the window. The image, however, seared into his perfect eidetic memory. The small, trembling frame, the hopeless fight against the storm, the pathetic little box of food. He glided from the room, his heeled boots making no sound on the ancient marble. The conclave's afternoon session was due to begin, a tedious debate on territorial boundaries with the were-creatures of the north. But it would wait. The fate of a few hundred miles of timberland was irrelevant. This flaw needed to be corrected. He found his majordomo, Alaric, in the grand hall, directing other phantoms to polish already gleaming silver for the evening's dreadful banquet. Alaric was older than the nation he now lived in, his face a dried apple of pragmatism and loyalty, his movements precise, economical. He was, in all things, efficient. Alaric, Cassian's voice was low, carrying no further than it needed to, yet it cut through the cavernous space like a shard of ice. Alaric materialized at his side instantly, bowing his head, his own movements as silent as his master's. "My lord, there is an item out of place in the west courtyard. A servant. It is malfunctioning in the storm." Alaric's ancient eyes didn't flicker. Not a muscle in his face moved, but Cassian sensed a tightening in his aide's posture. "Yes, my lord. The new girl, Ilara." The lack of surprise in his aide's voice only deepened Cassian's glacial irritation. "And you permit this breach of protocol? She will catch her death. It is an inefficient waste of a new hire, and we are already understaffed for the conclave." Alaric's expression finally tightened, just slightly, at the corners of his thin mouth. It was the vampire equivalent of a wince. "The girl is problematic, my lord, but she is where she is, perhaps by her own choice." "Choice?" Cassian's voice dropped a degree, becoming colder than the rain lashing the windows. "No human chooses hypothermia. Explain." Alaric hesitated, a rare and telling sign. "My lord, the kitchens and staff halls are difficult during the conclave. Our guests are restless." He gestured vaguely toward the atrium, where the wine spill had occurred. "The aroma of the living, it is distracting to them, particularly the new blood." Cassian's eyes narrowed. "I am aware. That is why the human-only zones are warded. They are impenetrable. You know this. I designed the wards myself." This, at last, seemed to discomfort Alaric. He swallowed, a dry, rasping sound. Yes, my lord. The wards are perfect, of course. But the girl, she is foolish, a human. She seems to prefer the reign to the attentions of Lord Valerius's retinue in the public areas. She has been warned, as have all the staff, to stay out of sight, to use the private passages. It seems she has taken the instruction literally to an idiotic degree. Cassian processed this. Alaric's explanation made sense, but it felt incomplete. He had seen fear. He knew what it looked like on a human. He had cultivated it for centuries. The girl's posture, it wasn't just fear of being seen, it was resignation. It was shame. So, she chooses the storm over a warded, warm, guaranteed safe zone? Cassian pressed, his voice soft and dangerous. She fears Valerius so much that she won't even go to the one place he cannot follow? Alaric looked down. My lord, she says she does not wish to disturb the other staff. Disturb them? This was getting more illogical by the second. How? I did not press the matter, my lord, Alaric said stiffly. It was a human staffing issue. I told the head housekeeper to handle it. I will have the girl retrieved at once. She will be disciplined for her lack of sense and for attracting your notice." "No," Cassian said. Alaric froze, his hand half raised. "My lord, you will do nothing. You will return to your duties. Inform the conclave I am delayed by 10 minutes." "Yes, my lord." Alaric bowed, relief and confusion warring on his ancient features, and then he was gone, a shadow swallowed by other shadows. Cassian turned and walked back toward the solarium. He stood before the vast, dark glass, staring down. The girl was still there. She had stopped trying to eat. The plastic box was now clutched to her chest, a pathetic, useless shield. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking so hard it seemed her very bones might rattle apart. She was just enduring. "Disturb the other staff," he repeated to himself, the words tasting like ash. That was the lie. That was the flaw in Alaric's report. Why would the other servants, her own kind, be disturbed by her presence in the safe hall? Unless the threat wasn't Lord Valerius. Unless the threat wasn't the guests at all. Unless the threat was in the safe zone with her. Or, a more chilling thought, what if she was cast out? What if her own kind, in their terror, had made her a sacrifice to the storm rather than harbor her? He had built an empire on the simple, unassailable foundation of order. He had protected his territory, his assets, and his secrets for a millennium. And this wet, shivering, illogical girl in his garden was a flaw in the code. A puzzle he now found, to his own profound distaste, he had to solve. Not because he cared if she lived or died. Mortals were mist. They appeared, they condensed, they vanished. But because, in his house, nothing and no one was allowed to be broken without his express permission, and he intended to find out, very personally, who had broken her. 10 minutes turned into 3 hours. Such was the nature of the conclave. Cassian was forced to sit on his basalt throne in the great chamber, his face an impassive mask, and listen. He listened to Lord Valerius's silver-tongued arguments about shipping routes, his words dripping with veiled insults aimed at the sisters from the Crescent City. He listened to the sisters hiss back, their ancient feral power making the tapestries tremble. It was all so loud, so temporary. They bickered over decades, over cities. Cassian thought in millennia and continents. He endured it. He was the anchor, the unmovable object. He let their posturing and their petty ambitions break against his silence. When he finally did speak, his voice, though never raised, cut through the din and finalized 3 separate treaties and 1 execution order. The conclave was adjourned for the evening. The lords and ladies swept from the hall, eager for the hunt or for the diversions he had arranged in the blood cellars. He was, at last, alone. But the image of the girl in the storm had not left him. It had remained in the back of his mind, a dissonant chord in a perfect symphony. Alaric's explanation that she was disturbing the other staff was a loose thread, and Cassian had a compulsion to pull such threads until they unraveled or proved their strength. He did not seek her out that night. That would be impulsive. Instead, he waited. He observed. He let the systems of his house run, precisely to see where the flaw would reappear. The next day passed in a similar blur of political maneuvering. But as evening approached, as the weak sun died behind the mountains and the fog rolled in to reclaim the valley, he found himself once more in the obsidian solarium. The storm had passed. The air was clear and cold, the stars sharp and indifferent. And, as he had suspected, she was there. The anomaly was not the rain. The anomaly was her. She was in the same spot, on the same cold stone bench in the carriage house courtyard. There was no rain to disguise her misery now. The cold was just as biting, and she was again shivering, this time wrapped in a threadbare coat that was clearly her own, not part of the uniform. She was eating again, that same sad plastic box. But her movements were different. She would take a mechanical bite, chew it without seeming to taste, and then she would stop. Her other hand was clutching something small, held close to her chest. He watched, his enhanced vision piercing the gloom as if it were daylight. She would look down at the object, and her shoulders would hitch. Then she would force herself to take another bite. This was not a person avoiding her co-workers. This was a person performing a ritual of penance. He had seen enough. Alaric's information was not just incomplete, it was wrong. And a system built on wrong information was a system destined for collapse. He did not walk. He did not glide. He moved. One moment he was in the solarium, surrounded by cold glass and starlight. The next, he was in the courtyard, the gravel silent beneath his feet, the frigid air parting around his stillness. He cast a shadow so complete it seemed to drain the light from the very air. She didn't notice him until he was 5 feet away. She was staring at the object in her hand. He saw it now, a small, worn photograph, its edges soft with handling. "You find the view lacking in the staff hall?" His voice was not loud. It was barely more than a whisper, but it had the texture of falling ice. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Ilara let out a sound that was not a scream, but a dry, terrified gasp, as if her lungs had forgotten how to draw air. She recoiled so hard she slipped from the bench, falling to her knees on the wet gravel. The plastic box flew from her grasp, scattering its contents, the pale, cold rice, across the stones. She scrambled, crab-walking backward, her eyes wide, black pools of terror in a face gone chalk-white. "My lord!" she gasped, the words tearing from her throat. I'm sorry. I was just... I'll go. I'm sorry." She tried to stand, to flee, but her limbs were uncoordinated with panic. "You will not!" It was not a request. It was a statement of absolute fact, and it froze her more effectively than the cold. She remained half-crouched on the ground, trembling so hard he could hear the faint chatter of her teeth. He took one step closer, looking down at her, and God surveying an insect. He was disgusted, not by her, but by this mess. The spilled food, the raw human panic, the sheer, unadulterated disorder. "The kitchen is warm," he stated, his voice flat. "The staff hall is secure. It is warded against all guests. You are safe there." He paused. "Yet you are here. First in the rain, now in the cold. You are inefficient. You are illogical. And my majordomo believes you are disturbing the other staff. Explain why." Tears were now streaming freely down her face, instantly chilling on her skin. I don't mean to, my lord, I promise. I like the quiet. I make them uncomfortable." He tilted his head, a gesture of cold curiosity. "You make them uncomfortable. The other humans." "Yes," she whispered, seizing the lie he had offered. They don't like me. I'm new. I'll eat faster. I'll stay in my room. Please, I need this job." Cassian's patience, a thin and brittle thing, snapped. "Do not lie to me," he hissed, and this time his voice was not human at all. It was a predator's sound, and the air temperature around them dropped several degrees. "To lie to me is an insult. It is disorderly, and I hate disorder." He saw the lie shatter in her eyes, replaced by a new, deeper, more profound terror. "The staff hall is warded. he continued, his voice a low, lethal cadence. But the main corridors are not. The atrium is not. The gallery is not. You were not avoiding the staff. You were avoiding them. My guests. Her breath hitched. It was a confession. Who? He demanded. Please, my lord. It was a misunderstanding. Who? I was in the East Hall, she finally choked out, the words tumbling over each other. I was just polishing the silver. I didn't see them. Lord Valerius and the sisters. Cassian's face became a mask of stone. Go on. They stopped. Lord Valerius, he smiled. He said, she swallowed. He said, what a loud little mouse. I didn't understand. I apologized. And one of the sisters, she leaned in. Ilara was shaking so hard she had to grip her own arms. She leaned in and sniffed me. And she said my smell was disgusting, that it was like shouting in a library, that it was too bright, too alive. Cassian's mind, a cold analytical engine, processed this. He knew what they meant. Some humans, rare humans, had a resonance, a vitality in their blood that called to the senses, a scent that was not just scent, but a taste on the air. To a disciplined vampire like himself, it was a minor note. To feral, impulsive beasts like the sisters, or an arrogant Epicurean like Valerius, it was an irresistible, maddening temptation. It made them lose their precious, fragile control. They told me, Ilara whispered, her voice cracking, that if they caught the scent of me near the main dining hall or the guest wings again, they would silence the noise. Permanently. Lord Valerius said you would. You would thank them for cleaning up a distraction. Silence. The only sound was the wind in the distant hemlocks and Ilara's ragged, terrified breathing. Cassian was utterly still. He was processing the monumental, staggering arrogance that they would dare to give orders in his house, that they would dare to threaten his property. For she was his property, as was everything and everyone under this roof. They had bypassed his authority. They had broken his order. He looked at the girl, now weeping silently into her hands. The staff hall is still safe, he said, his voice flat. The wards are absolute. Why do you not eat there? Why did you lie? Because, she looked up, her face a mask of utter despair. I did. The first night. I went to the staff hall, but the other staff, they could smell it too. Smell what? The fear. The stain. The other servants, they knew the guests had marked me. They were afraid. They said my presence, just having me there, was endangering them all. That I was guest bait. That I would draw the guests' attention and maybe the wards wouldn't hold. The head housekeeper, she told me to make myself scarce, to not cause trouble for the rest of them. So I did. I came here, where no one can smell me. She had been cast out, not just by the predators, but by the flock. Cassian stared at her. This broken, logical, illogical creature. The puzzle was solved, but the solution was infuriating. One final question remained, the most logical one of all. This is a house of monsters. You are terrified. You are outcast by both sides. The town is 10 miles away, a short walk for a human so desperate. Why are you still here? Why not simply leave? This question seemed to break the last of her composure. Because I can't, she cried, the word tearing out of her. Because I... Her hand, the one that wasn't braced on the gravel, flew to the object she had dropped, still clutched in her fist. The photograph. She held it out to him, a trembling, desperate offering. Because of him. Cassian did not take it. He merely looked. The photo was worn, blurry, and damp. It showed a young boy, perhaps 10 years old. Smiling a gap-toothed smile, his hair as dark as Ilara's. "My brother," she whispered, her voice raw. "His name is Leo. He's sick." Cassian said nothing. Sickness was a mortal concern. It was irrelevant. "He's dying," she said, as if sensing his cold dismissal. "The doctors in Seattle. They say it's his blood. It's not working. It's a plastic anemia, they call it. His body. It's just stopping. They gave him a few months, maybe." She was sobbing now, but she didn't lower the photo, holding it up to him like a shield. I heard stories. In the city. Desperate stories. A folktale. About the Lord of the Valley. About Shadowfen. They said the man who lived here was older than the trees. That he had power. Power over life and death. Power over blood. She finally looked up, her terrified, tear-filled eyes meeting his cold, ancient gaze. I didn't come here for a job, my lord. I came here to find you. I took the job as a cleaner just to get inside the walls, to get close, to beg you, to save him." Silence. Absolute, profound, and heavy. Cassian stood there, a statue of black basalt, the wind stirring his hair. He had come to the courtyard to fix an anomaly, to correct a flaw in his system. He had expected to find a disobedient servant, a petty human squabble, perhaps a minor threat from a guest. He had not expected this raw, desperate, impossible human hope. It was the most disorderly thing he had ever encountered. It was illogical. It was insane. It was audacious. To come to the lion's den, not just to steal, but to beg the lion to save the lamb. He looked at the spilled rice on the gravel. He looked at the trembling girl. He looked at the blurry photo. He had found out who had broken her. Everyone. He made a decision. It was not based on pity or compassion. He told himself it was based on order. His guests had dared to interfere with his property. His staff had failed to manage a problem. And this human had brought a variable into his equation that was so impossibly bold that it demanded a response. He turned, his long coat sweeping over the gravel. "My lord." "Wait, please," she cried, scrambling to her feet. He stopped, but did not turn. "You will not eat in the garden again," he said, his voice as cold and clear as the night. "You are an asset of the house. You will not be damaged." But my brother, Leo, please." "Go to the main kitchen, now," he commanded. "Tell Chef Dubois that Alaric has placed you on special diet. He will feed you. You will then go to your assigned room. You will not leave it." "But, my lord," he turned his head, just enough to fix her with one ice-blue eye. "I have heard you. Your request is being considered. Now, do as you are told." He didn't wait for a reply. He was simply gone, a shadow vanishing into other shadows, leaving Ilara alone in the courtyard, shaking not from cold, but from something she hadn't felt in months. It wasn't hope. It was far too terrifying for that. Ilara did not move for a full minute after he vanished. The courtyard was silent, save for her own shuddering breaths. The terror of his presence was a heatless fire that had burned away all other sensations. "I have heard you," he'd said. "It is being considered." It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was the judgment of a god. She forced herself to her feet, her knees raw, and walked like an automaton to the main kitchens. The moment she pushed through the service door, the atmosphere changed. The kitchen was a vast, warded cavern of copper, steel, and steam. The staff looked up. Their faces, which had been pinched with fear or cold indifference, now registered a new, more complex emotion. Confusion. She walked to Chef Dubois. "Chef." Her voice was a reedy whisper. He didn't look up. "You are late, girl, or early. I don't care. The scullery is—" I was sent by Alaric," she stammered. He said, "I am on a special diet." Dubois' cleaver stopped. He looked up at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw her soaked clothes, her pale face, the gravel on her knees. He saw the shadow of the master that now clung to her. The other servants froze. Dubois stared, then barked, "Henri, bowl, the good broth, bread, the real bread, and hot tea, now." He pointed a thick finger at a small, isolated table. "You, sit. You do not move until I say." Alara sat. She was given a bowl of soup so rich and hot it made her eyes water. The staff gave her a wide berth. They did not speak to her. She was no longer Ilara the bait. She was now Ilara, the Lord's interest. She had been plucked from the flock, and in doing so had become something other. Cassian did not consider for long. He had found the root of the disorder. It had two heads. He found the sisters first. They were in the tapestry gallery, admiring a brutal hunt, their laughter like dry rattles. They did not hear him approach. "You find my collection amusing," his voice stated. They spun, their feral grace turning to stiffness. "My lord Cassian," the one named Selene purred, "we were just admiring the vitality of the work." "Your tastes are simplistic," Cassian said, gliding to a stop before them. The shadows in the hallway deepened. "You prefer your art loud." They recognized the word. "It was just a human," Diana hissed. "It smelled of sunlight. It hurt our senses." "It hurt your senses," Cassian repeated, his voice dropping to a temperature that made the air frost. "And in my house, you decided to correct my property." His power flared. It was not a shout. It was a pressure. The ancient, heavy, crushing weight of his will filled the gallery. The flames in the candelabras sputtered, burning blue. The sisters choked, their hands flying to their throats, not because he was touching them, but because the air was suddenly too heavy to breathe. "Everything in this house," he whispered, the sound filling the entire hall. "Every stone, every shadow, and every single heartbeat belongs to me. You are guests. You have disordered my collection. You will not do so again." He released them. They collapsed against the wall, gasping, pale with a terror they had not felt in centuries. He found Valerius in the library. Cassian didn't even bother with the pressure. He simply walked to the center of the room. "Lord Valerius," he said. Valerius stood, all silk and smiles. "Lord Cassian, a pleasure. I was just— Your business at this conclave is concluded." The smile vanished. I beg your pardon? The treaty vote is not for 2 days." "It is now," Cassian said. "I have heard your arguments. They lack originality, as does your choice of amusement." Valerius paled, seeing the shaken sisters enter. "The girl," he spat. "She was mine," Cassian countered. "And you, Lord Valerius, are no longer welcome at Shadowfen. You, the sisters, and your retinues will be gone before sunrise. My majordomo will record your votes, in absentia." It was a political execution. Valerius, seething, bowed. "As my lord wishes." "Order," Cassian thought, as he watched them scramble to obey. Order was restored. Almost. He sat in his study. Alaric materialized in the doorway. "My lord, the departures are underway. It has caused a significant stir." "They will cool," Cassian said. "The girl, Ilara, what of her?" "She is in her room, as commanded, terrified." Alaric paused. "What are your intentions, my lord? The reason for her scent, her vitality, it will remain. The other staff, they are unnerved by her protection. It is a new disorder." "The staff will endure it," Cassian said. "They will learn that my protection is absolute. And the request, the brother?" Alaric's stillness finally broke. "My lord, to use the vitae, the blood of ages, it is forbidden. It is a perversion. To give blood to a mortal, it creates an unbreakable bond. It changes them. It is an act of creation, and creation is chaotic. It is not forbidden." "Alaric," Cassian murmured, rising, "it is simply unprecedented." He paced. Why did this matter? It was illogical. But her hope was the most profound, insane, disorderly act he had ever witnessed. It was a challenge. "Her hope is an anomaly," he said, "and anomalies must be resolved. They must be either crushed or fulfilled." He turned. "Alaric, send my personal guard to Seattle. Find the boy, bring him here, and fetch the girl." The old infirmary wing had not been used in a century. It was cold and sterile. Leo was lying on a stark white cot, a tiny, translucent creature, his breathing a shallow whisper. Ilara was kneeling by his bed, holding his hand. The doors opened with a heavy thud. Cassian entered, filling the room with his cold, ancient presence. Ilara recoiled, but did not leave her brother's side, turning to face him like a mother wolf protecting a cub she knew she could not save. Cassian looked at the dying boy. He saw the failing machine, a biological mistake. "This is what you hoped for?" he asked Ilara. "Please," she whispered, the last of her pride gone. "Please, you are the Lord of Blood. The stories said you could command it. Please." Cassian moved to the bedside. He looked at the boy, then at his own hand. He produced a small silver scalpel from his sleeve. Ilara flinched. Slowly, he made a precise incision on his own wrist. A single drop of blood welled up. It was not normal blood. It was not the dark, dull red of mortals. It was vitae. It was ruby dark, thick, and it seemed to thrum with a light of its own. A millennia of compressed life. It was power. "This is not healing, girl," he said, his voice low, as he held his wrist over the boy's pale lips. "This is remaking. This is a chain you can never break." "I don't care," she sobbed. "Save him." He let the single, potent drop fall. The moment it touched the boy's tongue, the effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Leo arched off the bed, a silent scream frozen on his face. Color, vibrant, shocking, flooded his skin. He took a deep, shuddering gasp, a real breath. His eyes flew open. They were no longer dull. They were bright, vital, and aware. He looked at Cassian. He did not look in fear. He looked in recognition. Then his eyes closed, and he fell back onto the cot, breathing deeply, color in his cheeks, already slipping into a true, healing sleep. Ilara collapsed, her head falling onto the cot, sobbing in a violent, overwhelming relief. Castian stood there, watching them. He felt strange, a phantom drain. He felt the tie settle, anew, insignificant, but present golden thread in the dark tapestry of his existence. Ilara finally looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and awe. "What? What do I? How can I ever?" she stammered. "What? What do you want from me?" "You owe me nothing," Cassian said, and he realized it was true. This was not a transaction. "Your debt is to him. You will remain at Shadowfen." Her face tightened. As your prisoner? As his food?" "No," Cassian said, the word final. "You are an anomaly. The boy, he is my anomaly now. He carries my mark. He cannot return to the mortal world. He will heal, but he will be different. And you are his guardian." He turned, his long coat sweeping the stone floor as he walked toward the door. "My lord," she called out, her voice stronger now. "Why? Why did you do it? You said—" "I was disorder. You hate disorder." Cassian stopped in the doorway, the shadow framing him. He thought of the rain on the glass, the spilled rice on the gravel, the arrogance of Valerius, and the impossible, illogical, infuriating hope in her eyes. "I have spent millennia," he said, his voice a quiet resonance, "building an existence defined by control, by order. I controlled my lands, my assets, my hungers. I believed that power was the ability to prevent disorder, to dominate chaos." He looked back at her, at the sleeping, healed child, a small, warm spark of life in a house of the dead. "You," he said, "taught me that is an incomplete equation. You are the embodiment of chaos, of illogical, desperate human hope. And you did not break my house. You challenged B." He stepped out of the infirmary into the darkness of the hall, but his voice remained. "Power, I see now, is not merely the strength to control. That is a static, cold, and empty thing. True power, true mastery, lies in the choice of its application. It is the courage to act, not just to prevent. You came to me seeing a monster that could destroy, but you were audacious enough to ask it to create." He straightened, a flicker of something new in his ancient eyes. "You will not be a maid. The position is inefficient. You will be the liaison for all human staff. You will ensure my order is one of compassion as well as efficiency. You will answer to me. Alaric will loathe it." He paused. "It will be a new, more perfect order." He was gone. Ilara sat in the silent infirmary, holding her brother's warm, living hand. She watched the first, weak light of dawn creep through the high, barred windows. She was in a house of monsters, bound to its master by a debt she could never repay. But as the light touched her brother's face, for the first time since she'd walked through the gates of Shadowfen, she was not cold, and she was no longer afraid of the dark. She had seen what the darkness was capable of.